When Shenroi opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was the chrome flash of a motorcycle mirror, and the second was the grin of a girl she had once spent 10 years hating without ever truly understanding. The motorcycle idled at the school gate, black, paint gleaming under the late summer sun. The girl on it wore the school skirt too short, socks too loose, lipstick too bright, and the kind of confidence that made rules look childish. In Ruai's first life, that confidence had been enough to set fire to an entire future. She knew.
This scene.
She knew it so well that for one dizzy second, she thought she was still dreaming in the hospital bed where her first life had ended. But dreams did not usually come with the smell of hot asphalt, the ache of a backpack strap cutting into her shoulder, or the rough voice of the security guard muttering that students should not block the entrance.
Dreams also did not bring back so sharply the
memory of a wedding hall gone silent around her, while the man she had married pointed at her with drunken red eyes and said, "I did not marry a
Wife. I married another mother."
Yi Yanzhou stood beside her, now 17.
Again, clean-cut and restless, his school badge straight, his gaze anything but. He was staring at the girl on the motorcycle as if she were the first window he had ever seen in a locked room. In her first life, Rui had seen that look and mistaken it for a passing crush. She had told herself it would fade. She had told herself grades mattered more. She had told herself she knew him better than he knew himself. By the time she understood she had been wrong, she had already spent her youth tutoring him, defending him to his parents, pulling him back from every cliff he ran toward, and slowly turning herself into the wall he resented most. The girl on the motorcycle flicked her chin up. Top student, she called lazily to Yanzhou. Want to skip evening study and see what the city looks like after dark in her first life. Rui had stepped in before he could answer. She had said his parents would know that mocks were coming, that one reckless night could become a habit and one habit could ruin a year. She had been right. That was the worst part. She had been right and he had hated her for being right. He had gone home that night under the cold glare of his parents and the colder pressure of her concern, and from then on every kindness she offered was filed away in his mind as another iron bar on a cage he had not asked her to build. This time she only smiled. Yanzhou blinked as if he had expected a lecture to rise from her throat by instinct. Even Mo Shinyi, the girl on the motorcycle, looked surprised. Rui adjusted her glasses, took one step back from both of them, and said very softly, "Go ahead. Have fun." The words landed like a dropped cup. Yanzhou frowned. "What? You heard?"
me," Ruai said. "If you want to go, go."
"It is your life." There was no anger in her voice, no sarcasm, no challenge. That unsettled
Him more than if she had shouted.
In the life she had already lived, he had always known exactly who she would be, the one who remembered his schedule, the one who texted him review points at midnight, the one who stood between him and every disaster. Standing here now with the gate crowded behind them and the engine rumbling before them, she watched the confusion flicker across his face and felt something in herself loosen for the first time in years. Mo Shinyi laughed first.
"Then get on," she said.
"Unless your courage only works in front of textbooks." Yanzhou's ears reddened. Pride moved him where freedom could not. He swung onto the back seat with the awkward determination of a boy trying to look fearless. For a second, before the motorcycle shot forward, he looked over his shoulder at Rui as if expecting her to change her mind, wave him down, call his mother, do something. She only lifted a hand and said, "Don't miss. First period tomorrow." Then the motorcycle roared away. Rui watched until the black shape dissolved into traffic. The wind they left behind touched her face like the ghost of another life. In that vanished life, she had once believed love meant preventing someone from making mistakes. Now she stood in the same sunlight and understood that love, at least the kind she had mistaken for duty, could become a greed of its own, the desire to prove you could save someone who never wanted saving. A notification buzzed on her phone. Group chat. Mock exam rankings discussion. University application rumors. The ordinary, merciless machinery of senior year waited for no heartbreak, remembered or otherwise. She looked up at the school building, at the banners that read "Fight for the Future" and "One More Year for a Lifetime," and felt a calm so fierce it was almost joy. In her first life, she had lost Tsinghua by 11 points. In this life, she intended to lose nothing. Senior year settled around Shen Rui like an old discipline she had once resented and now chose with open eyes. She rose before dawn, ran 3 laps around the neighborhood while the sky was still pearl gray. reviewed physics formulas over breakfast, and reached the classroom before the first bell. What changed was not the work was familiar.
What changed was the
Direction of her attention. In her first life, half her notebook margins had been filled with
Gu Yanzhou's weaknesses.
geometry under time, pressure, reading comprehension errors when he was
anxious.
the exact point after 8 at night when his concentration would collapse unless somebody forced him to take 10 minutes away.
From the desk.
She had built him the way patient people build a bridge, stone by stone, telling herself the bridge would be worth the labor once both of them crossed it together. She had never noticed that while she was carrying stones for two, no one was carrying hers. Now all the notes in her margins belonged to her. Professor-level geometry tricks copied. From an old competition forum, a reminder to ask teacher Shu for the provincial training papers, vocabulary lists, a reading list for the essay contest that could give a 10-point policy bonus in admissions. She wrote down every opportunity as if collecting coins from a road she had walked once in darkness and now walked with a lantern. The first person to notice was Lin Sa, her deskmate who had previously believed Roy was born knowing the answer to everything. Lin Sa poked her notebook one morning and whispered, "Why are you writing yourself a war?"
Plan. Because it is a war plan, Roy replied.
Without looking up. For the city rank for my life,
Lin Sa
laughed, but not because she thought Rui was joking. Then remind me never to stand on the other side. At noon, when the cafeteria smelled of oil and noise and impatience, rumors about Gu, Yanzhou and Mo Xinyi arrived before the food. Someone had seen them at a karaoke bar. Someone else swore Yanzhou had started smoking. Another said he had dyed the underside of his hair silver and hidden it beneath the regulation black. The stories kept growing antlers and tails as they crossed tables. Rui listened only enough to confirm the pattern. He was going exactly where he had once gone, only faster now that she was no longer slowing him down. That afternoon, his mother called.
Ruai, Mrs.
Gu said in the careful tone adults use when they want something large to sound small. Have you? Xin Yanzhou today, Rui sat in the library, annex with a stack of chemistry papers, and stared at the phone for one breath too long. In her first life, this question had been the first link in a chain that wrapped around her neck for years. Have you seen him? Can you talk to him? He only listens to you. If he ruins the exam, what will happen to him? We treat you like our own daughter. You know what kind of family we are. You know he is not bad, only distracted. Help him, just this once. Then just this week. Then until the mock exams. Then until the real exam. Then into university. Then into work. Then into marriage. This time, she answered plainly. I have not. There was disappointment on the other end, then impatience, disguised as sorrow. But you two have always been close. Not that close, Auntie.
Mrs.
Gu lowered her voice.
Roy, he respects you.
If you would just talk to him, maybe remind him. What matters, Auntie? Roy interrupted. Gently, what matters to him is something he has to decide, not something I can decide for him. Silence. Then sharper, how can you say that, you know? He is at a dangerous age. So am I, Ruai thought. Aloud, she said only, I have to go. There is evening study. When she hung up, her fingers trembled once, then stilled. It was not guilt she felt. It was grief, old and thin as paper, for the girl she had been and the ease with which everyone had once volunteered her life for someone else's rescue. That evening, Gu Yanzhou appeared in the classroom halfway through self-study, smelling faintly of cigarette smoke masked under mint gum. His uniform shirt was untucked. A silver streak flashed in his hair when the fluorescent light hit it. He stopped beside her desk and tapped the corner of her book with 2 fingers. You told my mother where I was. Roy finished the line she was solving before lifting her eyes.
No.
He searched her face for something familiar, indignation, concern, the urge to explain herself. Finding none, he grew irritated. Then why did she suddenly start checking my phone? Maybe because she is your mother? He laughed without humor. Don't pretend you do not care. That almost made her smile. In his mind, care had always been the axis of the world. If she was not chasing him, then she must be
waiting to.
If she was not speaking, then she must be punishing him. The possibility that he had simply ceased to be central to her days was still too large for him to imagine. I care very much, Rui said. His expression changed, quick with vindicated heat. About differential equations, she added.
Move.
You are blocking the light. Several classmates snorted into their books.
Gu Yanzhou's face
darkened. He leaned closer and hissed, "You are acting."
Strange.
Maybe I was strange before. For one. Second, he looked almost young enough to be.
Wounded.
Then pride rescued him. He stepped away with a cold smile and returned to the back row where, by the end of the week, his seat became mostly decorative. Ruai watched.
None of it directly.
She did not need to. His decline left measurable traces missed. Quizzes, absent signatures on homework, new read, marks on classroom attendance sheets, numbers. Told stories cleanly. By the time the first monthly ranking was posted, she stood first in the grade and Gu Yanzhou had dropped out of the top 50.
The
Teachers surrounded the ranking board in a storm of satisfaction and alarm.
Shen Ruoyi again.
Not again. Higher.
He, Yanzhou, what happened to him? He.
Had more in him. Everyone always said that. About him. More in him. As if unused potential were a moral virtue. No one ever said what Rui had more of. More. Discipline. More clarity. More hours. More. Willingness to be lonely for a goal. Her success still arrived to other people as surprise. Though she had constructed it brick by brick, when she walked away from the board, she caught her own reflection in the corridor window. Thin girl, serious eyes, plain white shirt, hair tied. Low, posture straight as a drawn line. In her first life, this version of herself had seemed insufficient beside Mo Xinyi's bright disaster. In her second, she saw something else. Entirely. She looked like a person who belonged to herself. The city pretended every top high school was a place of pure concentration. In truth, it was an ecosystem of nerves. Students cried in stairwells, copied formulas onto the backs of their wrists for courage, broke up in text messages between tests, and attached life and death meaning to half a point. On a chemistry paper, senior year sharpened everything until even gossip could cut. By October, Mo Xinyi had become the school's favorite scandal. She arrived on motorcycles, skipped assemblies, and somehow managed to flirt with visibility itself. Teachers used her name as a cautionary tale. Boys used it as a prayer. Girls used it as a warning to one another, and sometimes to themselves. Ruoyi never had to mention her. Mo Xinyi handled self-promotion with professional discipline. Yu Yanzhou predictably grew easier to read as he tried harder to appear unreadable. He began wearing his rebellion in fragments. A bracelet hidden under a cuff, a lighter in his pocket, excuses spoken in the tone of a person performing freedom for an audience. If his parents shouted, he shouted back. If teachers called home, he stopped answering his phone entirely. The more people pressed him, the more he mistook resistance for identity. 1. Friday after class, the dean stopped Rui outside the administration building. "You were neighbors with Gu Yanzhou for years," he said, choosing his words as if assembling a dangerous machine. "What do you think is going on with him?" The mature answer would have been complicated. Family pressure, romantic, projection, adolescent vanity, the intoxicating relief of disappointing people before they could be disappointed in you. Instead, Rui said, he is discovering that choices have weight, and he dislikes the feeling. The dean blinked. That is not untrue. He almost asked her to intervene. She saw the request rise toward his
Mouth like a bad habit.
Then, perhaps because he saw her school bag stuffed with competition papers, or perhaps because some part of him recognized that asking one child to save another was laziness dressed as compassion, he let it die. "Focus on your own exam," he said finally.
I intend to.
That weekend, Roy took the train across town to attend the provincial physics training camp. In her first life, she had turned down the invitation because Gu Yanzhou's mother had cried in her kitchen and asked whether the camp could
wait until after the next mock exam.
She had believed there would always be another chance for herself. There had not been. Now she entered the university laboratory with a notebook in one hand and the strange, floating sense of reclaiming stolen property. The room smelled of dust, metal, and marker ink. Students from all over the province sat at long tables, some already solving warm-up questions. On the board, at the front, stood an assistant coach with narrow shoulders, rolled sleeves, and the absent-minded severity of someone who lived primarily in abstract thought. He wrote his name on the board, Chen Qian. Ruoyi remembered him not from school, but from magazines years later, where he appeared beside photographs of a compact robotics company that had gone from dorm room prototype to national supplier in 6 years. In that first life, she had met him once at a conference and spent 20 minutes talking about educational pricing models, while half her mind tracked whether Gu Yanzhou was offended that no one had seated him near the VIP table. By the end of the conversation Chen Qian had, handed her a business card and said, almost amused, when you are ready to spend all your time on your own mind, call me. She never had. Now, in this bright room full of students who had not yet become themselves, he looked impossibly young. He distributed the first problem set and spoke without greeting. If you
Want guaranteed results? Go memorize.
If you want to understand why the world continues to function despite human stupidity, do the hard problems. Some students laughed nervously. Ruoyi did not. She bent over the paper and felt delight move through her like current. 3 hours later, after most of the room had surrendered to silence, Chen Qian stopped beside her table. He did not praise her immediately. That would have been ordinary. Instead, he tapped the margin of her solution, where she had abandoned the standard method
Halfway through and built a shorter path from.
symmetry. You do not trust instructions. He observed only when they waste time.
Good.
He placed another sheet on her desk, one not given to the others, then stopped solving other people's easy
Questions.
Ruoyi took the paper. It was beautiful and vicious. She had not felt this alive in months. When camp ended at dusk, Chen Qian found her at the gate and asked where her parents had parked. She told.
Him. She was taking the bus.
He looked mildly offended on behalf of efficiency. For an hour and a half, it is direct. He considered that, then nodded toward the dark sedan waiting under a plane tree. My route overlaps half of yours. Get in. In her first life, she would have refused out of caution, modesty, and the fear of appearing improper. In this one, she thought only save time as solved work and opened the door. They spent the ride discussing field theory, scholarships, and why students from ordinary families often wasted their best years learning to be grateful instead of ambitious. When she got out, Chen Qian handed her a slim book full of past Olympiad selections with notes. In the margins, I have already squeezed what I need from it, he said.
Now you can.
Ruoyi?
Held the book as if it were warm.
Thank you.
He studied her for a moment under the bus stop light. You are in your final year.
Right. Yes.
Then learn one thing early. His voice was calm, almost indifferent, which made the truth in it harder. People will call you cold the moment you stop carrying them. Let them. The sedan pulled away before she could answer. At home, she put the book on her desk, touched the cover once, and laughed quietly to herself. She had forgotten how many doors existed in the world when she was not spending all her strength holding open the wrong one. By November, Shen Rui's name had become a fixed object in the school, first on rankings, first on recommendation lists, first in the mouths of relatives who wanted to compare, children and teachers who wanted to inspire
Them.
She disliked fame when it came attached to projection, but she had learned how to use it. When the principal asked her to speak at the mobilization meeting before the next citywide mock, she agreed on one condition. No sentimental script written by the office. She would speak for 3 minutes and say exactly
What she wished?
the principal, who had learned that high achieving students with scholarships and press potential were a category of weather rather than a category of child, agreed. So Ruoyi stood on the auditorium stage in front of 1,000 students and said, everyone here has heard that senior year decides the rest of your life. That is only half true. Senior year decides whether you trust yourself enough to work for a future you cannot yet see. If you do, then one exam becomes a bridge. If you do not, no exam can save you. Your habits are louder than your dreams. Build the right habits. There was more applause than she wanted. There always was when people mistook rigor for inspiration. Afterward, as students spilled out into the corridor, Yanzhou caught up with her near the stairwell. He had grown thinner. Restlessness had sharpened his jaw and hollowed his eyes. A bruise yellowed faintly along one wrist where she guessed his father had grabbed him too hard in one of their
Fights.
You like this now? He asked, not bothering. With hello! Talking down to everyone from a stage, Rui slid her notes into her folder. If I were talking down, you would know. He laughed shortly. You are unbelievable. So I have been told. His gaze hardened. Do you know what my father said? When he saw your name in the newspaper, he said, if I had listened to you, I could have stood
There too.
Ruoyi finally looked at him fully.
Could you? For a second, he had no answer.
That
Was the wound he kept picking at not that she had succeeded, but that some part of him knew success had always been possible and he had thrown it away to prove he could. Regret offended his pride more than failure ever had. He leaned against the stairwell window. You think you understand everything because your grades are good.
No, Ruei said.
I think consequences exist even when we dislike.
Them.
You talk like you're 40. And you still talk like 17 is a philosophy. He straightened. At least I lived. Something almost tender. Passed through her, then not love. Nothing so. Foolish, but pity for the drama with which young men renamed irresponsibility into depth. She had once been susceptible to that performance. She was not now.
If this is living, she said.
Quietly. Why do you look so tired? He went. Still. Before he could answer, Mo Shinyi appeared. At the top of the stairs, helmet under one arm. A disciplinary slip folded in her hand like a joke. Yanzhou, she called. Are you coming? He looked between them. In that small pause, Ruei saw the entire architecture of his year, the thrill of being wanted by one person and admired by another. The pleasure of choosing the riskier road while pretending it had chosen him. He wanted her to protest. He wanted her to provide moral gravity so that his rebellion would continue to feel meaningful. Instead, she stepped aside and gave the handrail a light tap. Don't let me delay you. Mo Shinyi smirked. Yanzhou's mouth tightened. He followed the motorcycle girl down the stairs. But the old triumphant rhythm was missing from his steps. The citywide mock exam arrived with
Winter.
frost whitened the edges of classroom. Windows. Students wrapped their fingers around disposable coffee cups between papers. Teachers stopped, pretending sleep mattered, and began speaking in pure logistics, answer sheet alignment, transport times, emergency stationery, admissions trends. The school became a barracks run by insomniacs. Ruei entered the examination hall with Chen Qian's annotated book in her bag, a cough drop in her pocket, and a mind as clear as sharpened glass. She had prepared too long to be afraid. 3 days later, the rankings were posted online before noon. She was first in the city. Not first in school. Not first among science track students. First in the city, the principal called her parents before she even saw the list. Herself. Her mother cried. Her father, who believed emotion should generally arrive ironed and folded, bought a cake on the way home and pretended it was because the bakery stood near
His office.
television crews came the next
Morning.
Roy disliked the camera and disliked even more the way adults turned any girl with high marks into a symbol. Still, she answered patiently. She spoke about discipline, teachers, public, school resources, and the need to stop treating sons as natural heirs to family ambition.
The.
Clips circulated far beyond the city. Messages from distant relatives multiplied like mold. Former classmates appeared out of silence too. Congratulate her as if they had personally arranged her scores. And, inevitably, the Gu family came that evening.
Mrs.
Gu cried before she reached the sofa.
Mr.
Gu stood with his hands behind his back, jaw clenched so tightly it seemed to ache.
Gu.
Yanzhou arrived 5 minutes later, face closed. Eyes dark with a humiliation he tried to wear as disdain.
We are not asking much, Mrs.
Gu said, clutching Ruei's mother's wrist. Only that Ruei spend some time with him. He will listen if it is her. No, Ruei thought. He will listen only if what I say agrees with what he already wants. Her own mother looked to her, worried but not pressuring. That alone was enough to make gratitude rise in Rui's throat. In her first life, her family had been kind, but even kindness could be conscripted by other people's
Emergencies.
This time they had learned from her firmness, and she from theirs. Ruei set down her tea and
Said Auntie, Uncle, I can't tutor him.
Mrs.
Gu stared as if she had spoken blasphemy. Why?
I used to confuse ability with responsibility.
Ruei kept her voice even. I can share notes. I can recommend a teacher. I can tell him how I structured my time, but I cannot drag someone toward a destination. He does not want more than he wants to resist.
It.
Mr.
Gu's face went red. He wants it.
Do.
You, Ruei asked Yanzhou directly.
Everyone turned to him. He looked cornered, and because cornered people often choose the weapon closest to hand, he sneered. What I want clearly does not matter to any of you. There, Ruei said softly. That is the answer.
Mrs.
Gu sobbed harder. Her husband cursed. Yanzhou shoved a chair aside with more force than necessary and walked out into the cold. The Gu family followed, carrying their grief like a lit brazier that scorched everyone nearby. After the door shut, Ruei's father released a long breath. Do you feel guilty? She thought. Carefully. I feel sad. That is not the same. No, she agreed. It is not. Then she went back to her room, opened the city ranking printout once, folded it neatly into the back of her notebook, and
Returned to work.
victory meant little if it made you sentimental enough to slow down. Winter break should have been quiet, but cities rarely grant silence to people who become public. Examples. Ruei spent half of January filling out scholarship documents, competition registrations, and the special application. Materials universities requested from students. They had already begun to notice. The other half she spent hiding from the local Education Bureau, which wanted photographs of her donating books to a rural library for a publicity feature she had no time to attend. Whenever she could escape all that, she met Chen. Qian in the university library, 2 subway lines away. He was finishing the last term of his master's degree while developing with 3 friends and too much caffeine, a prototype for a low-cost logistics routing system. On paper, it was a research side project. In reality, it was a company waiting for enough courage to name itself one. Roy liked the honesty of that. It reminded her that ambition did not always arrive dressed as prestige. Sometimes it arrived sleep-deprived, carrying instant noodles and spreadsheets. At first, they spoke only of problems, optimization models, admission statements, the hidden costs of warehouse delays. Why? Mathematically elegant solutions often died the moment they touched human habits. Then they spoke of families carefully, like people testing the depth of unfamiliar water. Chen Qian's father had gone bankrupt when he was 14. Ruai's parents had not gone bankrupt, but in her first life they had paid for the mistakes of others until it was almost the same thing. She did not tell him about the first life. She did tell him what over-responsibility could do to a person. It makes praise dangerous, she said one snowy evening. Once people learn you can solve things, they start bringing you the parts of themselves they refuse to repair. Chen Qian rested his chin on one hand and studied her across a pile of annotated papers. That sounds practice. It is, then practice.
The opposite, too.
What is the opposite? He thought for a moment, letting problems remain correctly owned. She wrote that sentence in the back of her planner and underlined it twice. By the time second semester began, Gu Yanzhou had stopped pretending he could recover through last-minute intensity. He still announced grand plans every few weeks. He still bought new reference books with the feverish optimism of a gambler changing tables. But his concentration had been broken into habits too small to notice at first, and too numerous to escape later. He missed morning classes because he slept at 4. He missed evening study because Mo Xinyi wanted to drive past the river and feel the
Wind.
He stopped answering teachers, then stopped meeting their eyes. He was not happy. That was the childish irony of the freedom he had chosen. Rebellion built on another person's gaze could never feed a soul for long. By March, even Mo Xinyi was bored with his solemn devotion. She preferred drama to dependence, and Yanzhou, stripped of his academic confidence, had become a boy who wanted to be reassured that he was still special. One rainy Tuesday, she dumped
Him.
not with cruelty. Cruelty would have meant investment. She simply laughed when he asked whether she had been serious about them and said, serious, we were. Having fun, don't turn one semester into a funeral. Half the grade knew by lunch. By evening, so did every parent who checked. Class forums disguised as concern. Gu Yanzhou disappeared for 2 days. When he returned, he looked as if all the color had been washed out of him. He slept through morning reading. He failed a chemistry quiz in handwriting, so careless, the teacher called him out after class. He began in small, humiliating ways to circle back toward Rui, not directly at first, but through requests that smelled of their old arrangement. Could she send the math homework answers because he had left his paper in
School.
Could she explain the derivation of a formula just once? Could she lend him her summary of the modern literature section because hers were always clearer?
Ruai refused every time, not rudely, but with
The clean finality of a locked door.
He could
Not believe it. One afternoon, he cornered her beside the equipment room and said, I know you are still.
Angry.
I'm not angry.
Then why are you?
Doing this. Doing what? Watching me fail. Rui almost laughed at the innocence of that
Sentence.
In his mouth, the absence of rescue had become active harm. That was how dependency protected itself, by calling boundaries betrayal.
I am not watching you, she said.
I am busy.
Busy being perfect. Busy being occupied. He searched her face with an urgency that might once have moved her. I made mistakes.
Fine.
I know that now. But we grew up together. You really want to leave it like this in her first life? This was exactly the point at which she would have softened. Shared childhood, shared sidewalks, shared bowls of noodles in each other's kitchens, shared school mornings under one umbrella. Memory could be a blackmail artist when you let it. Instead, she asked, if I were not useful to you, what part of our growing up together would you still be trying to save? He had no answer, only hurt. But hurt was not the same thing as truth. Spring arrived in a rush of pollen and practice.
Exams?
Roy won the national essay competition, received a direct interview invitation from King Yuan University's elite social sciences program, and turned it down because she wanted mathematics and management, not prestige wrapped in vague brilliance. Her teacher called her stubborn,
Chen Qian.
called her correctly specialized. Her father called her at noon and said, with awkward pride, if you continue like this, I may have to become the kind of parent people
Hate.
meaning I will begin every conversation with, have I told you my daughter is city rank 1. Rui laughed so hard she had to leave the classroom when the final countdown banner went up above the blackboard. 80 days to the national examination. She wrote one line on the inside cover of her notebook, do not save what is trying to leave, build what is trying to become. She read it every morning before the first bell. The night before the exam, the Gu household erupted again. Through the thin spring air came voices, then breaking glass, then Mrs. Gu crying that their son had ruined himself. Rui sat at her desk beneath the warm cone of her lamp and solved 2 last integration problems while the storm next door spent itself against walls she no longer inhabited. At midnight, a message arrived from an unknown number. I was wrong. No signature was needed. She deleted it unread by anyone but herself and went to sleep. The national examination arrived in June with the smell of rain on hot concrete and police barriers set up outside every major testing center. Parents stood in clusters under umbrellas, speaking in whispers as if fear might become real if named too loudly. Vendors sold cold drinks, Lucky Charms, and sharpened pencils. Teachers moved through the crowd with the grave energy of generals pretending not to panic. Roy wore a plain white t-shirt, tied her hair low, and carried only the documents she needed. Her mother touched her shoulder once and said, whatever happens, come out smiling. Her father added, and write your name correctly. It was his version of tenderness under pressure. She loved him for it. Across the street, she saw Gu Yanzhou. He had not expected to see her looking so calm. That much was obvious. He stood beside his parents, face sallow from too many nights without rest, admission card clenched in one damp hand. His mother was speaking at him with desperate intensity, repeating instructions about composition structure and time allocation as if information could retroactively become discipline. His father looked 10 years older than he had in autumn. When Yanzhou noticed Rui, his gaze locked onto hers with something close to plea. She nodded once, not encouragement, not forgiveness, simply recognition that they were both here, alive, and about to take the exam. They had each prepared for it in their own way. Then she walked through the gate. The papers were difficult and fair. That was all she had ever wanted from life.
Chinese.
Composition first, mathematics in the afternoon. Comprehensive science the next day, then English. During the math paper, she felt the rare exhilaration of seeing exactly how a problem wanted to be solved. During English, she caught herself smiling at a reading passage about supply chain bottlenecks and thought absurdly of Chen Can's scolding. Delivery networks in the library. Between subjects, she drank warm water, stretched her fingers, and stayed away from every discussion of tentative answers. Confidence, she had learned, could be eroded by noise as easily as by ignorance. When the final bell rang, students burst from classrooms in laughter, tears, blankness, and delayed hysteria. Some called home instantly. Others tore their scratch paper into confetti. A boy fainted from heat and relief. The outside gate exploded in motion. Roy stepped in sunlight, and for one strange heartbeat, in her first life, she had left this exam, believing she had done well, but not enough, then spent the rest of the summer half proud and half haunted. Now she knew only that she had honored herself. That night she slept 12 hours. Results came 3 weeks later. The score? Website crashed twice before dawn. Group chats became emergency rooms of speculation. Ruoi finally checked hers, standing at the dining table while her parents hovered 3 steps away, pretending to give her space. 723. For a second, the number had no meaning. Then, meaning hit all at once. Her mother cried first. Her father took off his glasses, wiped them, put them back on, and checked the screen again as if the score might have been placed there by Generosity instead of fact. When the city ranking list was released an hour later, there it was in black and white. Shen, Ruoyi, first. First in the city, her father, actually sat down. What followed moved too fast to belong entirely to her. Calls from teachers, calls from local officials, calls from journalists who used words like model student and youth representative, invitations from
Universities.
scholarships, a visit from the mayor's office,
Photographs.
flowers, a banner outside the school gate with her face on it so large she considered taking a hatchet to it. She endured the theater because some of it would become leverage later, leverage for internships, a leverage for grants, leverage for the life she intended to build. Yanzhou scored 418. Not disaster, not enough, not close. Close enough for regret to sharpen, far enough. That fantasy could no longer disguise itself as
One bad week.
his parents sent gifts to Ruoi's house 3 days later, fruit baskets, expensive, tea, a watch she refused to accept. They did not speak the request aloud at first. They only cried, thanked her for being an example, said Yanzhou had finally understood things. Ruoi knew what would come next and stopped it before it arrived. Please do not ask me to wait for him, she said.
Mrs.
Gu froze.
Mr.
Gu looked at the floor,
Ruoyi.
continued, not cruelly but with mercy that had edges. Even if he repeats the year and enters a good,
University, what he lost is not one exam.
it is trust in himself and respect for work. I cannot
Lend him mine.
They left carrying the watch back out. In late August, Rui moved into the dormitory. At Beihua University, under a sky so bright it seemed almost theatrical. The campus was larger than memory, more alive than any brochure had
Captured.
Students from every province dragged suitcases across plazas. Parents gave impossible advice. Senior volunteers shouted directions until their voices went hoarse. Somewhere, someone was already falling in love. Somewhere else, someone was already failing. Royi began again. University suited her. Not because it was easy, nothing worthwhile had ever been easy, but because effort there opened outward instead of downward. Every hour invested created more horizon. She studied management science and applied mathematics, joined a research lab, learned enough code to argue product structure with engineers, and spent weekends in Chenqian's borrowed office helping sort datasets for the routing algorithm he had turned into an actual company. By her second year, she was no longer merely helping. She was building. The company got a name, then seed money, then clients who paid late and demanded miracles. Ruai discovered that entrepreneurship was half pattern recognition and half emotional endurance. She was good at both. She also discovered that working with Chen Qian felt nothing like working around Gu Yanzhou had once felt. There was no invisible janitorial labor, no assumption that her competence existed to compensate for somebody else's drift. When she solved something, it remained solved. When he disagreed, he argued with the idea rather than leaning on her guilt. One winter at 2 a.m, after they had spent 6 hours rewriting a pitch deck for an investor who thought logistics was just maps, Chen Qian looked at her across 2 empty noodle bowls and said, "You know the dangerous thing about you, Rui?" Did not look up from the laptop. "I assume there are several. You recover value too quickly. You see wasted systems and think they can be rebuilt." She closed the file and finally met his eyes.
That sounds like praise.
It is not always. His voice was gentle. Just make sure you're only rebuilding machines. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Rui smiled. "Good thing I know. Longer invest in people who arrive half broken. And expect applause." The corner of his mouth lifted. "I noticed." She never told him the full story of her first life. She did not need to. Some truths only had to be lived differently, not
Narrated.
by graduation. The company was no longer a precarious idea. It had warehouse contracts in 3 cities and a cross-border platform pilot that larger firms had laughed at until it began making money. Magazines called them one of the most promising young teams in the capital. Investors called with better manners than before. Chen Qian wore the same rolled sleeves and forgot to eat whenever deadlines stacked up. Ruai bought him vitamins and argued with freight schedules until dawn. Sometimes walking out of the office into the pale early light, she thought of the girl she had once been, the one who had defined love as rescue and excellence as something to be offered outward first. That girl had wanted to be chosen. This woman had learned how much more powerful it was to choose. Success made Shen Roi visible in ways school rankings never had.
Visibility.
She discovered was a magnet for resurrection. People from old circles reappeared with congratulations, investment suggestions, marriage jokes, and selective memories. Among them inevitably came news of Gu Yanzhou. He had repeated the exam once and improved. Enough to enter a private college in another province, then dropped out after a year. He had tried e-commerce because he heard it was easy money, then exam tutoring because his mother insisted he was still a good student at heart, then live stream sales, then short-term trading recommended by a roommate who disappeared with half his savings. Through all of it, he kept circling back to Mo.
Shini in stories, if not in life.
Sometimes he called her the great mistake of his youth. Sometimes he called her the only real thing he had ever felt. People who had ruined themselves often preferred mythology to accountability. Mo Xinyi's life had not become myth. It had become exactly what spectacle usually becomes when beauty has no plan behind it. A string of rooms paid for by men who liked novelty. A beauty studio partnership that collapsed in debt. A brief online popularity built on vulgar charm. And extinguished by a platform ban, then the long, humiliating labor of selling fantasy to people who never intended to respect her. When Ruai first heard the details, she felt no
Triumph.
decay was less satisfying up close than from a distance. It simply proved that recklessness rarely stayed glamorous once youth stopped lighting it from below. The actual reunion with Yanzhou happened on a humid summer evening during Roy's third year of graduate study. Her company had signed a regional cooperation agreement with the Municipal Commerce Bureau in her hometown, and the city, delighted by a local girl returning with capital and headlines, arranged a reception so ornate it almost felt satirical. Officials shook hands, photographers barked names. Her former principal nearly cried while introducing her to people who had once ignored his school. Roy wore a charcoal suit, low heels, and the expression of someone prepared to survive ceremonies by treating them as weather. When she stepped out onto the hotel terrace for air, she found Gu Yanzhou already there. He was leaning against the railing in a dark shirt too formal for him and too cheap to disguise it. Time had not made him ugly, only unfinished. The old good looks remained in outline, but confidence had gone missing from the center of
Them.
He looked like a draft that someone had abandoned after the promising first pages. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city spread below, louder and richer than the one they had known at 17. Across the river, two towers carried a giant advertisement for Rui's company. Yanzhou gave a short, embarrassed laugh when he noticed her following his gaze. You really did
It.
Ruai rested one hand on the cool stone ledge. I said I would work hard.
No.
He shook his head. I mean all of it. In the silence that followed, she understood what hurt him most. Not merely that she had succeeded, but that she had succeeded along the exact road he had once. Mocked discipline, study, patience, structure, the slow stacking of invisible effort until the world had no choice but to see the building. If her life had turned out ordinary, he could have gone on believing he had rejected a cage. Faced with her, he had to confront that he had rejected a staircase. I heard your speech downstairs, he said, about long-term value, occupational hazard. He smiled faintly, then lost the smile. Ruoi, I owe you an apology that probably came too late years ago. You owe yourself several.
More.
I know.
He surprised her by not fighting the point. He looked tired in a way no amount of sleep could fix. I used to think you wanted to control me.
You.
Used to be right about one thing, Rui said. I was too involved. His eyes lifted quickly. Hungry for absolution. She did not offer it. I was wrong to carry you as if that were love. She continued. But you were wrong to call care a prison just because it demanded something from you? He accepted the blow. Perhaps he had earned enough of them from life to recognize a true one when it came. After everything, he said quietly. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had listened? Roy considered the question. Honestly, if you had listened to me but remained the same, inside we would have built a prettier tragedy. She said, you might have entered a good
University.
We might even have married. You would still have hated me once the work began. His breath caught. On the terrace, under the hotel lights, she felt the ghost of the life that had already happened stand once between them and then dissolve. He whispered, I did hate you.
I know.
I thought you were turning me into someone else's
Dream.
Ruoi looked out over the river. And I thought if I loved you enough, I could turn you into your best self. We were both arrogant. That made him laugh, despite himself, and for the first time that
Night. The laugh sounded like the boy she had
once known. Then he said almost helplessly, is there? Really no way back. There was never a way.
Forward, she answered.
He flinched, then
Nodded.
something in him, perhaps long, exhausted, finally stopped pushing against the truth. When she turned to go, he said her name once.
More.
The woman with you tonight. The one from
Your company.
the lawyer with the short hair.
Is she your assistant? Roy understood at once.
Whom he meant, and a smile touched her mouth. Before she could prevent it.
No.
She is a partner in work. In life, potentially. She looked back at him. I'm allowed to be particular now. He lowered
His eyes. You always were.
Ruai left him on the terrace with the river noise and the city he had not learned how to enter. She walked back into the reception hall where Chen Qian, sleeves folded as always was, patiently surviving a conversation with 3 vice directors and 1 man who kept saying, young people these days, as if it were both accusation and blessing. When he saw her, his expression changed in the smallest way and became instantly easier. Rescued, he asked. Self-rescued, she said. Best kind. Much later, after the speeches and toasts and photographs were over, they drove to Ruai's parents' house instead of the hotel. Her mother insisted on cutting fruit no one needed. Her father insisted he was not curious about company cash flow while being visibly curious about company cash flow. Midnight arrived around a table sticky with peach juice and tea rings. As Chen Qian helped carry dishes to the kitchen, her mother leaned toward Rui and whispered, with all the tact of a woman who had waited years to ask, this one at least seems house
Trained.
Ruai nearly choked laughing. On the balcony with the old neighborhood lights blinking below and a summer breeze moving the curtains, she stood alone for a few minutes before bed. Somewhere beyond the dark buildings lay the high school gate, the street where motorcycles used to roar past the riverbank where she had once wasted tears on someone who wanted his life decorated rather than built. She thought of that first morning after rebirth, of the engine, the sunlight, the choice to step back and let another person run toward the future he insisted on wanting. That single step back had made room for her entire life to come forward. In her first life, she had believed the great tragedy was losing
Love.
in this one, she learned the greater tragedy would have been losing herself while calling it devotion. Below, her father was arguing with someone about whether cherry tomatoes needed
More, son.
in the kitchen. Her mother was still talking. Chen Qian's low voice answered once, amused and patient. The home she had protected in memory and rebuilt in reality stood around her, solid and unborrowed. Her work waited for her in the capital. Her name belonged to her. Her future did too. Shen Ruai rested her arms on the balcony rail and looked out into the warm, dark. The city glittered like 1,000 solved
Problems.
for the first time in either life. She felt no need to chase anything that was already leaving. She only had to keep walking toward what was willing to grow with her, and she had become
Very good at that.